Presque Isle Historical Society invites you to join us for a virtual tour of the Maysville Museum. The town of Maysville was established in the late 1820s at roughly the same time as Fairbanks Mills, now known as Presque Isle. In 1865, the town built a large two-story building on the corner of what we know today as the Caribou and Brewer Roads. In this excerpt from the 1870 Rowe and Colby Atlas, you will note the location of the Maysville Town Hall, which is today the site of the Maysville Museum. This building served simultaneously as the Maysville District School and the Maysville Town Hall. When Maysville Grange No. 153 was established in 1875, the building served as the Grange Meeting Hall as well. In 1916, the first devastating fire to plague this site demolished the building. A new building of the same size and footprint was built in its place. In 1939, the building once again burned to the ground. As Maysville had been annexed by Presque Isle in 1883, a much smaller building was built to stand in its place to serve as the one-room schoolhouse and grange. The Maysville School was permanently discontinued in 1949, leaving only the Grange meeting in this location until it was closed due to lack of membership in the late 1980s. The building reverted to city ownership and was sold to a private individual in 1996. Tragedy struck once again in 2004 when a fire, presumably from a discarded cigarette, set the building aflame once again. In 2011, Presque Isle Historical Society raised the funds to purchase the building with the intent of renovating it and turning it into a museum. The fire in 2004 damaged the southeast corner of the building and spread throughout the interior. Some of the interior damage can be seen here. The Society was able to save the original floor and interior doors, although char marks and watermarks are still visible. Today, the building exterior looks like this thanks to the contributions of many donors of both time and money, as well as grant funding. It took 6 years to raise the funds needed to complete Phase 1 and open on a seasonal basis. The building had to be raised and a new foundation poured, the chimney repaired, and the windows, roof, and siding replaced. In addition, the front steps were replaced and a handicapped accessible ramp was added. The museum opened in 2017. That same year, the Society received an honor award from Maine Historic Preservation for work to restore the building. At the award ceremony, Presque Isle Historical Society was the smallest organization and the only historical society to be honored. Society board members Kim Smith, behind the podium, and Rick Netto, holding the certificate, traveled to Falmouth, Maine to receive the award. The bronze plaque denoting the award is affixed to the exterior entrance. The actual award certificate hangs over the entrance to the museum in the foyer. In 2019, Presque Isle Historical Society was informed that both the Maysville Museum and the 1875 Vera Este House Museum had been accepted as distinctive destinations, a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. This was a first for Northern Maine. At present, the only other building in Maine in the program is Portland's Longfellow House. According to the National Trust, the intent of the Distinctive Destinations program is to bring historic sites together into a marketing collaborative to drive awareness for these historic places. As such, Presque Isle Historical Society had to meet the National Trust standards for visitation and interpretation. Some of these included: the site is interpreted for the public benefit in a manner that makes it meaningful and accessible to multiple and broad audiences and provides a fair and balanced presentation of the specific historic topic. It must be open to the public via tours and events on a regular schedule. The Society had to have a website. The Society has to have historic designation at national, state, or local level and/or a positive ranking on GuideStar or Charity Navigator, positive TripAdvisor and/or Yelp reviews, and the site must be operated in a manner that is consistent with the mission and the values of the National Trust. If you look up at the lights in this photo, there is some interesting history here. The hanging lights closest to the black banners came out of the Fred P. Stevens store on Main Street. The light fixture in the center came from the kitchen of a large Victorian home on Academy Street that was built in 1909 by one of the original owners of Presque Isle's many starch factories. How good are you at identifying items from our past? There are numerous artifacts in the What Is It display for you to try your luck. One of the more popular interactive exhibits in the museum is our working antique telephone switchboard. This switchboard came from the Presque Isle telephone office and originally served as a long-distance switchboard. It was renovated thanks to the help of Dave Thompson from the Telephone Museum in Ellsworth, Maine, and a grant from Maine Humanities Foundation. The telephone had a huge impact on rural northern Maine, connecting us with the world and lessening the social isolation of our large farms. This switchboard can make calls between the two antique telephones located on either side of the exhibit. Thomas Fair, the starch king of Aroostook County, owned this beautiful home on Main Street. After his death, the house was purchased by the telephone company, American Telephone and Telegraph, which was commonly referred to as Ma Bell. The house was used as a dormitory for the unmarried female operators and thus became known as the Bellstead. Unfortunately, this beautiful house no longer stands. Here at Maysville, there are 4 cornerstone exhibits, several smaller exhibits, and 2 new exhibits every year. The 4 cornerstone exhibits are the Aroostook War, Presque Isle in the Civil War, Agriculture, and Presque Isle's one-room schoolhouses. Visitors to the museum will notice cows everywhere. At last count, a total of 21 cows could be found around the museum. In fact, there is a cow scavenger hunt for children. The reason for the cows is so that people will ask, why? Many people do not realize that following the American Revolutionary War, no formal border between Maine and Canada was established. This was not really an issue until Maine became a state separate from Massachusetts and began to give out land grants to encourage settlement. The vast forests of tall trees found here were an important commodity of the day. Buildings, as well as ships and their tall masts, were built from this timber. In addition, wood was the primary means of heating homes. There were 12,000 acres in dispute between Maine and the Canadian province of New Brunswick. Several conflicts erupted. One such conflict took place right here in Maysville, the incident of Arnold's cow, hence all of the cows found in the museum. Local farmer Joseph Arnold owned a cow that was constantly being claimed by his neighbor, Mr. McCrae. In 1828, Mr. McCrae sought the assistance of the Canadian constable, who arrived with a few armed men and forcibly took the cow from Mr. Arnold. This enraged the men of Maysville, who strongly believed they lived in Maine and that the Canadian constable had no jurisdiction here. The men from Maysville went after the Canadian constable and his men, disarmed them, took away the cow, and escorted them to what the Maysville men believed to be the Canadian border, with instructions for them not to return. In 1838, the Aroostook War broke out. It was also known as the Bloodless War or the Pork and Beans War. Visitors can check out their knowledge of the war with the movable question panels. In addition, visitors can also listen to the Aroostook War Song. 4 blockhouses or forts were built because of this war, 2 in Maine and 2 in Canada. The 2 in Maine were in Fort Kent and Fort Fairfield. The blockhouse in Fort Kent is original, while the one in Fort Fairfield is a replica. The 2 in Canada were in Edmundston, New Brunswick, and in Cavanaugh, Quebec. Presque Isle Historical Society has a robust Civil War exhibit. Many do not realize the great impact the Civil War had this far north in rural Maine. The population in Presque Isle at the time was approximately 800, of which roughly half were male. Approximately a quarter of the population left to serve in the Civil War. In a community whose primary industry was agriculture, this was devastating. It means about half of the male population was gone, leaving women, children, and older men to take care of their own chores and the farms as well. About 1/3 of those who left to serve in the war perished in the war. Some of our artifacts from the Civil War include a lady's mourning dress, a hair wreath, yes, it is really made from human hair, a gar star denoting the grave of a Civil War soldier who was a member of the Grand Army of the Republic, a caisson box, and the Civil War diary of local soldier Harrison Robinson. Additional artifacts include a gunpowder flask, an original kepi cap, a ceremonial sash, a mourning bonnet, and a Confederate $100 bill. One wall showcases the portraits of local men who served, as well as actual Civil War promotional and discharge paperwork. Following the war, one of the men from Presque Isle was formally appointed as our first official postmaster. This is the appointment certificate signed by President William McKinley. That gentleman was James Fair, brother of Thomas Fair, the Starch King of Aroostook County. James built this home on Academy Street, which still stands today. In addition to a flintlock pistol, the exhibit includes this beautiful officer's sword, which was carried by Second Lieutenant Benjamin Franklin Owen, also of Presque Isle. As mentioned, this building once served as Maysville Grange number 153. At the time, there were 2 granges in Presque Isle, Maysville and the Aroostook Union Grange number 143 on the south end of town. The Grange is the only rural fraternity in the world and is America's oldest farm organization. The Oxford Democrat on September 6, 1887, reported that the Grange was organized for the intellectual, social, and financial empowerment of the farmer and his family. It seeks not to build up agriculture at the expense of any other class, but it would give the farmer an equal chance in all things. The Grange's legal name is the Order of Patrons of Husbandry. The National Grange was founded in Washington, D.C. on December 4, 1867. The Grange was also one of the first formal groups to admit women to membership on an equal basis with men. an equal vote regardless of sex. Remember, the Grange was founded in 1867, 53 years before women had the right to vote in a United States election. In 1874, there were 64 Granges in Maine with 2,000 members. By 1876, there were 228 Granges with 12,000 members. Today, there are about 170 Granges still in existence in Maine. Few people realize the debt they owe to this farmers' organization. Many common, everyday privileges we now take for granted are the result of legislative lobbying by the Grange. These include better highways, rural mail delivery, parcel post, farm credit, rural electricity, land grant or agricultural colleges, conservation and forestry, the regulation of public utilities, truth in fabric laws, rural health, pure food and drugs, state police and fire protection, Canadian reciprocity, and more. The third of our cornerstone exhibits is Agriculture, His Story, Her Story, Our Story. Did you know that Maine provides 4% of the national potato crop, with 96% of that coming from Aroostook County? In fact, the first acre of potatoes in Aroostook County was planted on the farm of Henry Rolfe, a Civil War veteran, right here in Maysville. His house still stands today on the Caribou Road just north of the museum. Another important farmer from Maysville was Elisha Parkhurst. Parkhurst's farm was just east of the museum on the Brewer Road, formerly known as Parkhurst Road. He was one of the largest shippers of potatoes in the country. In addition, the U.S. Department of Agriculture acknowledged that it was from one of his ideas that the potato sprayer was invented. Farming has certainly changed over the years by the means and the length of time it takes to get goods to market. The tools have also dramatically changed. Visitors can search for the name of antique tools on display on the wall and learn what they were originally used for by using our rotating top table. Farm animals were very important to farmers and very expensive. Because of that, farmers needed to protect their investment and use every part of the animal. Our remarkable recyclable cow display allows visitors to turn a section of the cow to see how that part was used in the 1800s versus today. Were you aware that one of the reasons we have red barns has a lot to do with cows? Farmers built structures to protect their investments, but quickly learned that wind and rain could still get in between the boards. They used what they had on hand, soil, leftover milk, and blood from the slaughter to create a mixture that was then used to coat the wooden structures. This mixture dried a red color. Also on display in the museum, visitors will see the sesquicentennial quilt made by the Crown of Maine quilters to celebrate Presque Isle's 150th anniversary in 2009, with images that are representative of places and nature commonly found in the area. The banner for Presque Isle's 100th anniversary in 1959 is also on display. The logo was designed by an 11-year-old boy who combined a potato with the image of the Snark missile, America's first nuclear missile, which was stationed here in Presque Isle from 1959 to 1961. Select pieces of a tea set given to Daniel Duff and his wife Susan Mitchell Hooper Duff upon their marriage in 1842 are seen here. The Duffs lived just north of the museum, next to Henry Rolfe. According to The History of Aroostook by Edward Wigan, Mr. Daniel Duff was an early settler and a man well known and highly respected. Mr. Duff's farm adjoined Captain Rolfe's on the south, and his house was well known for its hospitable entertainment in the early days of the town. Mr. Duff was killed by a falling tree. His wife, Susan Mitchell Hooper, was the first school teacher in Aroostook County. She taught her pupils in a log house near the river. Her 3 older children all died during a diphtheria epidemic in September of 1849. Susan herself contracted the disease, and by the time she recovered, all her children, ranging in age from 5 months to 6 years, had been buried. The last of the 4 cornerstone exhibits is on Presque Isle's rural one-room schoolhouses. Although Presque Isle was founded in 1828 as Fairbanks Mills, our first village schoolroom did not appear until 1844. According to the 1904 Presque Isle Register, the date the first rural school was built is not known. It was located on the Ratcliffe Farm on the Centerline Road and known as the Red Schoolhouse. The next school was built in Maysville in 1844, quote, where the burying ground now is, unquote. By 1904, the school system consisted of 22 rural schools and 11 in the village. During the 1903-04 school year, 874 students were enrolled. It is said that Presque Isle compared favorably with other towns with buildings of ample size, well adapted to the purpose, and were either new or in good repair. In a letter from our collections, we are told that the following was a typical day at the one-room schoolhouse. School was called into session with the ringing of the school bell. Students would stand to recite the Lord's Prayer, and beginning in 1892, the Pledge of Allegiance. The one-room schoolhouses typically had an entryway to hang coats and leave boots, a pot-bellied stove with mittens lined up on the stovepipe to dry, a large chalkboard covering one wall, wooden floors, and outhouses for restrooms. The schoolhouses usually did not have running water, so any water needed for drinking had to be carried in by pail from a nearby stream or farmhouse. Recess would be signified by another ringing of the school bell. With no playground equipment, the children amused themselves playing games such as tag. The school was filled with upwards of 20 to 30 students and sometimes the occasional pet dog. There was a specific routine involved so that the single teacher could keep all of the students occupied while teaching numerous grade levels. Although the children sometimes had difficulty studying due to various disruptions, an atmosphere of discipline and learning permeated the classroom. Many students felt they got a great deal out of listening to the other classes go about their lessons. Anyone who had to be disciplined either felt the wrath of the teacher's ruler or stood in the corner for a period of time. Being disciplined at school was usually followed by being disciplined at home as well. This is a school bell from the Merrill School on the Fort Road in what was originally Maysville. It is a number 4 bell, which specifically indicates it was used as a school bell. The other means to identify the use of bells at that time was the diameter. There are future plans for Maysville. Phase 2 calls for the installation of a well for running water, the addition of a break room, accessible restroom, a second means of egress, and a paved driveway and parking spaces. Thank you for joining Presque Isle Historical Society for this virtual tour of the Maysville Museum. We certainly hope you enjoyed the tour and will visit us in person sometime soon. The museum is typically open June through October, Monday through Saturday, from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m.